The boot came out of nowhere, a steel-toed blur that cracked against her temple and sent 47 recruits into stunned silence. Staff Sergeant Maya Torres tasted copper-felt gravel digging into her palms, but she didn't fall. Not completely. What happened in the next 11 minutes would end careers, shut down an entire training unit, and force 3 generals to arrive in a convoy that shook the gates of Camp Harrison. But that morning, bleeding into Georgia dust, Maya had no idea her refusal to collapse would rewrite Army protocol forever. Before we go further, hit that subscribe button, stay with me until the end of this story, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Maya's story travels. Maya's knees didn't buckle. That was the first thing Rollins noticed, and it made him angrier. She steadied herself, one hand pressed to her temple where blood was already seeping through her fingers, the other flat against the red Georgia clay. Her vision blurred. The world tilted. Somewhere behind her, a recruit was vomiting from heat stroke, but all she could hear was her own heartbeat slamming against her skull. "Get up, Torres!" Staff Sergeant Marcus Rollins stood over her, his shadow cutting across her face like a blade. His voice was flat, almost bored, as if kicking a senior NCO in the head was just another Tuesday. Maya looked up at him. She didn't speak. Not yet. She was calculating how hard he'd hit her, whether her vision would clear, whether she could trust her legs. 14 commendations. 2 combat deployments. A Bronze Star with Valor device tucked in a drawer back home because she never wore it. And now this. She rose slowly, dirt clinging to her uniform, blood trailing down her cheek. "You got something to say, Torres?" She did, but she knew better than to say it now. Behind Rollins, the platoon stood frozen in formation. 47 recruits, most of them 19 or 20 years old, watching their medic instructor get assaulted by a man who outranked her by exactly nothing. They'd been told Camp Harrison was where warriors were forged. What they were learning today was something uglier. Maya turned toward the recruit who'd collapsed, Private First Class Daniel Kemper, a kid from Ohio who'd been struggling all week. He was on his side now, gasping, his lips cracked and pale. Heat exhaustion, maybe worse. "He needs water," Maya said. Her voice came out steady, clinical. "And shade. Now." Rollins stepped between her and the recruit. "He needs to toughen up," Rollins said. "Just like you do." Maya met his eyes. "He's going into shock. Then he shouldn't have joined the Army." There it was. The line drawn. The old-school philosophy that had gotten soldiers killed for decades. The belief that cruelty built character, that compassion was weakness, that a medic showing mercy was a liability. Maya had heard it all before. In Iraq, when male soldiers questioned her ability to haul a wounded man under fire. In Afghanistan, when a lieutenant told her she was too emotional for combat medicine because she cried after losing a patient. She'd proven them wrong every time. But here, stateside in a training environment that was supposed to be safe, she was still fighting the same war. She stepped around Rollins and knelt beside Kemper. "Don't touch him," Rollins said. Maya ignored him. She checked Kemper's pulse, fast, thready. His skin was clammy. Classic signs of heat injury progressing toward heat stroke. She needed to cool him down, get fluids in him, move him out of the sun. She didn't need permission to save a life. "Torres, I gave you an order." "You gave me an illegal order," Maya said without looking up, "and I'm not following it." That was when Rollins kicked her again. This time, he aimed for her ribs. The impact drove the air out of her lungs and sent her sprawling sideways into the dirt. Pain exploded across her torso, sharp, breathtaking, white-hot. She curled instinctively, arms wrapping around her midsection, trying to pull oxygen back into her body. The platoon didn't move. They wanted to. She could feel it. But they were 19, 20 years old, fresh out of basic, and Rollins had spent 6 weeks teaching them that defiance meant suffering. Maya forced herself onto her hands and knees. Blood dripped from her temple onto the clay little dark spots that disappeared into the red dust. Her ribs screamed. She didn't care. Kemper was still down, still in danger, and if she didn't move, he was going to die. "Stay down, Torres." She stood up. Rollins' face twisted. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" No, Sergeant, Maya said quietly. I don't. For a moment, she thought he was going to hit her again. His fist clenched, his jaw tightened. She could see the rage building behind his eyes. Rage at her defiance. Rage at the fact that she wouldn't break rage at everything she represented in his tidy, brutal little world. But then a voice cut through the heat. What the hell is going on here? Lieutenant James Morrison appeared at the edge of the training field, his face flushed, his uniform soaked with sweat. He was young, 24, maybe 25, and he'd only been at Camp Harrison for 3 weeks. Long enough to know something was wrong with the way Rollins ran his platoon. Not long enough to have done anything about it. Until now. Morrison's eyes moved from Rollins to Maya to the blood on her face. Sergeant Rollins, Morrison said slowly. Did you just assault a senior NCO? Rollins straightened. I was correcting a discipline issue, sir. By kicking her in the head. She was insubordinate. Morrison looked at Maya. Is that true? Staff Sergeant? Maya wiped blood from her eye. I was providing medical care to a recruit suffering from heat exhaustion. Sergeant Rollins ordered me to stop. I refused. Morrison's face went pale. He turned back to Rollins. You ordered a medic not to treat a casualty. He's not a casualty, Rollins snapped. He's a recruit who needs to learn. He's a human being who's about to go into heat stroke. Morrison's voice cracked. And you just assaulted the one person trained to save his life. The field went silent. Maya didn't wait for permission this time. She dropped back down beside Kemper, pulled off her jacket, and used it to shade his face. Somebody get me water, now! 3 recruits broke formation and ran. Rollins took a step toward her. Morrison moved between them. Don't, Morrison said. His voice was shaking, but he held his ground. Don't even think about it, Sergeant. Rollins stared at him. For a long moment, Maya thought the situation was going to escalate. That Rollins was going to go through Morrison to get to her, that this was going to end with more blood on the ground. But then Rollins smiled. It was a cold, ugly smile, the kind that said he'd already won some game nobody else knew they were playing. You're making a mistake, Lieutenant, Rollins said quietly. Morrison pulled out his radio. Command, this is Lieutenant Morrison at Training Field 6. I need immediate medical evacuation for 1 recruit, and I'm reporting an assault on a senior NCO by... Rollins moved fast. He grabbed for the radio. Morrison yanked it away, stumbling backward, and keyed the mic again. By Staff Sergeant Marcus Rollins. I need command presence on site immediately. This is not a drill. The radio crackled. Then a voice came through, calm, female, terrifyingly composed. Morrison, this is Colonel Reyes. Say again your last transmission. Morrison swallowed. Ma'am, I'm reporting an assault. Staff Sergeant Maya Torres was kicked in the head and ribs by Staff Sergeant Rollins while attempting to provide medical care to a recruit. She's injured. The recruit is in critical condition. I need help, ma'am. Silence. Then, hold your position, Lieutenant. Help is on the way. The radio went dead. Rollins's face went white. Maya pressed a water bottle to Kemper's lips. He was conscious now, barely his eyes unfocused. She murmured to him, soft, steady, the same tone she'd used in field hospitals when soldiers woke up screaming. You're okay. You're going to be okay. Stay with me, Kemper. Stay with me. Behind her, she could hear Morrison's breathing, fast, panicked, like a man who'd just set something irreversible in motion. They're going to crucify me, Morrison whispered. Maya didn't turn around. No, they're not. Rollins has friends, the old guard. They'll say you did the right thing. Maya finally looked at him. Because you did. Morrison stared at her, at the blood on her face, at the way she was still kneeling beside Kemper, still working, still refusing to quit. How are you so calm? He asked. Maya smiled faintly. I've been shot at, Lieutenant. This is just another day. But her hands were shaking. 11 minutes later, the sound started. It was low at first, a rumble that felt more than heard, vibrating up through the ground and into Maya's bones. She looked up from Kemper frowning and saw Morrison's face go slack. What is that? one of the recruits whispered. The rumble grew louder, closer, and then through the heat shimmer rising off the asphalt road, 3 black SUVs appeared. They weren't driving. They were tearing through the base like the hand of God had just pointed and said go. The convoy didn't slow at the checkpoint. The MPs barely had time to step aside before the vehicles blew past engines, roaring dust kicking up in massive plumes behind them. Maya had seen convoys like this before. In Iraq, when high-value targets were being extracted. In Afghanistan, when generals moved through hostile territory. Never stateside. Never at a training base in the middle of Georgia. The SUVs skidded to a halt at the edge of the field. Doors opened, and 3 generals stepped out. The first was a woman in her late 50s, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, her uniform spotless, despite the dust. 2 stars gleamed on her collar. Major General Patricia Vaughn. Maya had heard stories about her, how she'd dismantled 3 separate units for toxic leadership, how she'd personally testified before Congress about hazing and abuse in training commands, how she had zero tolerance for the old boys club mentality that still infected parts of the Army. The second was a man in his 60s, lean and hard as iron with 3 stars and a face that looked like it had been carved out of stone. Lieutenant General Marcus Hale. He'd commanded troops in Desert Storm Iraq and Afghanistan. He didn't speak much, he didn't need to. The third was younger, early 50s maybe, with kind eyes and a quiet intensity that made people nervous. Brigadier General David Chen. He ran the Army's Ethics and Accountability Division, which meant he was the man called in when the system had failed. All 3 of them were here. For her. Maya's chest tightened. She wanted to stand to salute, to do something, but Kemper was still barely conscious in her lap, and she didn't trust her ribs to hold her upright. General Vaughn walked onto the field like she owned it. Maybe she did. "Who's in command here?" Her voice was sharp, clear, and carried across the entire formation. Morrison stepped forward. His hand was shaking as he saluted. "Lieutenant James Morrison, ma'am. I'm the officer on duty." Vaughn didn't return the salute. She was too busy looking at Maya, at the blood on her face, the dirt on her uniform, the way she was cradling a recruit like he was her own son. "And who," Vaughn said slowly, "is that Staff Sergeant Maya Torres, ma'am? She's our senior medic instructor." Vaughn's eyes moved to Rollins. He was standing at rigid attention now, his face pale, sweat dripping down his temples. "And you are Staff Sergeant Marcus Rollins, ma'am." "Did you assault Staff Sergeant Torres?" Rollins opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Ma'am, I was enforcing. Yes or no, Sergeant?" The field held its breath. "Yes, ma'am." Vaughn's expression didn't change. She simply turned to General Hale and nodded once. Hale stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it cut through the heat like a blade. "Staff Sergeant Rollins, you are hereby relieved of duty pending investigation. You will surrender your weapon, your credentials, and your authority. You will not speak to any member of this unit. You will not leave this base. Am I clear?" Rollins' face went gray. "Sir, am I clear?" "Yes, sir." 2 MPs appeared from nowhere and moved to flank Rollins. He didn't resist. He just stood there staring at Maya, and for a moment she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not quite regret, but close. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Then the MPs led him away. General Chen approached Maya. He crouched down beside her, his movements careful, respectful. "Staff Sergeant Torres," he said softly, "how badly are you hurt?" Maya shook her head. "I'm fine, sir, but Private Kemper needs evacuation. Heat stroke, possible organ damage. He needs an IV and cooling measures." Chen glanced at Kemper, then back at Maya. "You're bleeding." "I'm functional." "That's not what I asked." Maya met his eyes. There was something in his expression, not pity, but understanding. The look of someone who'd seen good soldiers get broken by bad systems too many times. "I'll get checked out after Kemper's stable," she said. Chen smiled faintly. "You're stubborn." "Yes, sir." "Good." He stood and gestured to the medics who'd arrived with the convoy. "Get them both to the hospital. Full workup. I want reports on my desk within the hour." The medics moved in with a stretcher and field equipment. Maya finally let herself be pulled away from Kemper, let them check her vitals and wrap her ribs and clean the blood from her face. The whole time she watched General Vaughn. Vaughn was walking through the formation now, looking at each recruit in turn, not inspecting them, studying them, reading their faces. "How long has this been going on?" Vaughn asked. No one answered. "I'm not asking as a general," Vaughn said quietly. "I'm asking as a soldier. How long has Staff Sergeant Rollins been running this unit like a prison camp?" Still silence. Then from the back of the formation, a voice young, shaking but determined. "Since we got here, ma'am. 6 weeks." Vaughn turned. "Name?" "Private First Class Samantha Cross, ma'am." "What have you witnessed?" "Private Cross hesitated. Maya could see the fear in her eyes. The fear of speaking up, of being labeled a snitch, of making herself a target. "It's okay," Maya called out. Her voice was hoarse, but it carried. "Tell her." Cross looked at Maya, then back at Vaughn. "He hits us, ma'am. Not hard enough to leave marks, but enough to hurt. He calls us names, makes us do extra PT in the heat without water. Last week, he locked Private Jensen in a storage room for 4 hours because he asked a question." Vaughn's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you report this?" "We tried, ma'am. Lieutenant Morrison tried, but Rollins has friends in command. They said we were being soft, that we needed to toughen up." Vaughn turned to Morrison. "Is that true, Lieutenant?" Morrison swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am. I submitted 3 formal reports in the last 2 weeks. They were all dismissed." "By whom?" "Captain Brennan, ma'am." Vaughn pulled out her phone and made a call. It was brief, clipped, and final. "Captain Brennan is hereby relieved of command," she said when she hung up. "As of this moment, Training Company C is under direct supervision of my office. Lieutenant Morrison, you're acting commander until I appoint a replacement." Morrison looked like he might pass out. "Ma'am, I'm not qualified." "You were qualified enough to do the right thing when it mattered," Vaughn said. "That's more than I can say for most of your chain of command." She turned back to the formation. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "Over the next 72 hours, every single one of you will be interviewed by General Chen's office. You will tell the truth. You will not be punished for speaking up. You will not be retaliated against. And if anyone tries to silence you, you will report it directly to me. Is that understood?" "Yes, ma'am." The response was uneven, uncertain, but it was there. Vaughn nodded. "This unit failed you. The Army failed you. And I'm here to make sure it doesn't happen again." She walked over to Maya, who was sitting on the back of an ambulance, now her ribs wrapped in ice pack pressed to her temple. "Staff Sergeant Torres," Vaughn said, "I need your statement." Maya nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Not here. At headquarters. I want everything, how long this has been going on, who knew about it, why no one stopped it." Vaughn paused. "And I want to know why you didn't break." Maya looked at her. "Ma'am, most people would have stayed down," Vaughn said quietly. "After the first kick, after the second, most people would have let that recruit die rather than risk getting hurt again. But you didn't." Maya's throat tightened. "He was a kid, ma'am. I couldn't just—" "I know." Vaughn's expression softened. "And that's why I'm here. Because the Army needs more soldiers like you, and fewer like Rollins." She extended her hand. Maya shook it. The ambulance took Maya and Kemper to the base hospital. Kemper was stabilized within the hour, IV fluids, cooling measures, close monitoring. He'd be okay. Maya's ribs were bruised, not broken, and the gash on her temple required 6 stitches. The doctor, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes, worked in silence, her hands steady and gentle. "You're lucky," the doctor said finally. Maya almost laughed. "Doesn't feel lucky. You're alive. The recruit's alive. That's lucky." Maya didn't argue. When the stitches were done, the doctor stepped back and studied her. "I've been at this base for 8 years, the doctor said. "I've treated a lot of injuries, training accidents, equipment failures, the occasional stupid decision. but in the last 6 months, I've seen more accidents than in my entire career combined. Maya met her eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying I've been documenting everything. Every bruise that doesn't match the story. Every fracture that shouldn't have happened. Every recruit who comes in here terrified to tell me the truth. The doctor crossed her arms. I've been waiting for someone to blow the whistle. I'm glad it was you. I didn't blow any whistle, Maya said. I just refused to let a kid die. Same thing, the doctor said. Sometimes all it takes is one person saying no. She handed Maya a bottle of painkillers and a medical profile limiting her physical activity for the next 2 weeks. Rest, the doctor said. General Vaughn's going to need you at full strength. Maya looked at the profile. For what? The doctor smiled grimly. For the fight that's coming. Not. By nightfall, the base was in chaos. Not violent chaos. Bureaucratic chaos. The kind that happened when 3 generals descended on a training command and started asking questions no one wanted to answer. Maya sat in a conference room at headquarters, her ribs aching, her head throbbing, and gave her statement. General Chen recorded it himself, his expression unreadable as she walked him through every detail. The kick, the second kick, the order to ignore Kemper, the 6 weeks of hazing and abuse she'd witnessed but couldn't stop. Why didn't you report it sooner? Chen asked. Maya hesitated. I tried, sir, 3 times. But Rollins had been here for 6 years. He had friends, and I was... She trailed off. You were what, Staff Sergeant? I was a woman, sir, in a unit that didn't want women. Every time I pushed back, I was told I was being emotional, oversensitive, that I didn't understand how training worked. Chen set down his pen. Did you believe them? No, sir. Then why didn't you keep pushing? Maya looked at him. Because I wanted to keep my job, sir. Because I wanted to keep training recruits. Because I believed, maybe stupidly, that I could change things from the inside. Did you? No. Her voice cracked. I just got kicked in the head. Chen was quiet for a long moment. You saved a life today, he said finally. And you exposed a system that's been broken for years. That's not nothing. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. Chen stood. Get some rest, Staff Sergeant. We'll talk more tomorrow. But Maya didn't rest. She went back to her quarters, a small, sparse room with a bunk, a locker, and a window that overlooked the training fields. She lay down, stared at the ceiling, and tried to process what had happened. 3 generals. A unit shut down. Rollins relieved. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something bigger, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Her phone buzzed. A text from Morrison. They're interviewing everyone. It's bad. Worse than we thought. Maya closed her eyes. She already knew it was bad. She'd seen the fear in the recruits' faces. She'd heard the silence when Vaughn asked why no one reported it. Another text, Vaughn wants to see you. 0700 tomorrow. Her office. Maya set the phone down and pressed a hand to her ribs. Pain flared sharp and hot, but she didn't take the painkillers. She needed to stay sharp, needed to think, because this wasn't over. This was just the first round. At 0700 the next morning, Maya stood outside General Vaughn's office. Her uniform pressed her boots, polished her ribs, screaming beneath the fabric. She knocked. Enter. Vaughn was sitting behind a desk, covered in files, thick labeled, ominous. She gestured to a chair. Sit. Maya sat. Vaughn studied her for a moment, then slid a file across the desk. Read that. Maya opened it. It was Rollins' service record. 22 years in the Army. Multiple deployments. Commendations. A Bronze Star. Letters of recommendation from senior officers. And buried at the bottom 3 reprimands for excessive discipline that had been quietly dismissed. Maya looked up. He's been doing this for years. Yes, Vaughn said. And no one stopped him. Because he was good at his job. Because he produced results. Because the old guard protected him. She pulled out another file. This one was thinner. Captain Brennan's record, Vaughn said. He received 4 complaints about Rollins in the last year alone. He buried every single one. Maya's chest tightened. Why? Because Brennan believes in the old way, the brutal way, the way that breaks soldiers and calls it strength. Vaughn's voice hardened, and he's not alone. She opened a third file, then a fourth, then a fifth. This is systemic, Vaughn said. It's not just Rollins. It's not just Brennan. It's a culture, and it's going to take more than one investigation to dismantle it. Maya's stomach sank. What are you saying, ma'am? Vaughn leaned back in her chair. I'm saying I need your help, Staff Sergeant. I need you to testify. I need you to stand in front of a review board and tell them everything. And I need you to be ready for the backlash. Backlash? You're going to be called a liar, a troublemaker, someone who couldn't handle the pressure. They're going to dig into your record, your deployments, your personal life. They're going to try to destroy you. Maya's hands clenched. I've been through worse. I know, Vaughn said quietly. But this is different. This is the army eating its own. And it's going to get ugly. For a long moment, Maya didn't speak. She thought about Kemper barely conscious in the dirt. About the recruits standing in formation too scared to move. About Morrison shaking as he called for help. About the doctor documenting injuries no one else would acknowledge. I'll do it, Maya said. Vaughn smiled. It was small, but it was real. Good, she said. Because we're going to burn this whole thing down. The review board convened 72 hours later in a building Maya had never entered before, a gray concrete structure at the edge of the base that looked more like a bunker than an administrative office. No windows, no signs. Just a steel door with a keypad and 2 armed guards who checked her ID 3 times before letting her through. Inside, the air was cold enough to make her breath visible. They're ready for you, a clerk said, not meeting her eyes. Maya followed him down a narrow hallway lined with doors that all looked the same. Her ribs ached with each step. The stitches on her temple pulled tight. She'd taken 1 painkiller that morning, just 1, because she needed to stay sharp. But now she was regretting it. The pain was a distraction she couldn't afford. The clerk stopped at the last door and knocked twice. Enter. Maya stepped inside. The room was small, cramped, and deliberately intimidating. A long table stretched across the center with 5 officers sitting behind it. 3 colonels, a brigadier general she didn't recognize, and General Vaughn at the far end. No one smiled. No one stood. They just watched her with the kind of cold assessment that made her feel like a specimen under glass. Staff Sergeant Torres, the colonel in the center said. His nameplate read, Harrison, no relation to the base, she hoped. Please sit. There was 1 chair facing the table, metal, uncomfortable, positioned so the overhead light hit her face directly. Maya sat. Colonel Harrison opened a file in front of him. You understand why you're here? Yes, sir. You've made serious accusations against a fellow NCO. Accusations that, if proven true, will end his career and potentially result in criminal charges. I understand, sir. Harrison looked at her. Are you prepared to stand by those accusations under oath? Yes, sir. Even knowing that Staff Sergeant Rollins has 22 years of exemplary service, that he's been decorated for valor, that his record shows nothing, not 1 incident suggesting he's capable of the behavior you've described. Maya's jaw tightened. She knew where this was going. She'd seen it before, the institutional defense mechanism that closed ranks around its own, that protected abusers, because acknowledging abuse meant admitting the system had failed. His record shows 3 reprimands for excessive discipline, Maya said carefully. They were dismissed, but they're there. Dismissed because they were unfounded, Harrison said. Complaints from recruits who couldn't handle the pressure of training. Recruits who looked for excuses to justify their own failures. Sir, with respect, let me be clear, Staff Sergeant. Harrison leaned forward. We've interviewed 47 recruits, 6 instructors, and 4 officers. And the picture that's emerging is far more complicated than your initial report suggested. Maya's chest tightened. Complicated how, sir? Several recruits have stated that Staff Sergeant Rollins was tough, yes, but fair. That his methods produced results. That the platoon under his command consistently outperformed other units in physical fitness discipline and readiness metrics. They're scared, Maya said. They're telling you what they think you want to hear. Or they're telling us the truth. Harrison closed the file. Which brings us to you, Staff Sergeant Torres. You've been at Camp Harrison for 8 months. In that time, you've filed 7 formal complaints about training procedures, 3 grievances against instructors, and 2 requests for policy changes. Would you say you have difficulty working within the established chain of command? Maya felt the ground shift beneath her. They weren't investigating Rollins. They were investigating her. I filed those complaints because I witnessed unsafe practices, she said slowly. Practices that violated Army regulations and put recruits at risk. Or practices you disagreed with because they didn't align with your personal philosophy. Harrison pulled out another document. Your evaluations from Iraq and Afghanistan describe you as overly empathetic, emotionally invested in patient outcomes, and resistant to command decisions regarding triage protocols. Those evaluations also note that I saved 18 lives in combat situations where other medics would have. They note that you disregarded orders, Harrison interrupted. That you prioritized individual soldiers over mission objectives. That you have a pattern of substituting your judgment for that of your superiors. Maya's hands clenched in her lap. She wanted to stand up to walk out to tell them all exactly what they could do with their review board. But she'd been in the Army long enough to know that losing control now meant losing everything. Sir, she said quietly, are you asking me if I think saving lives is more important than following orders? I'm asking if you have a problem with authority. I have a problem with abuse. The room went silent. General Vaughn, who'd been watching without speaking, finally leaned forward. Colonel Harrison, she said. Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Staff Sergeant Torres isn't on trial here. Staff Sergeant Rollins is. Harrison didn't look at her. With respect, ma'am, if we're going to determine what happened on that training field, we need to understand the credibility of the witness making the accusation. Her credibility is irrelevant. We have 47 witnesses. 47 recruits who were coached by Staff Sergeant Torres for 8 months, who see her as a mentor, who would naturally be inclined to support her version of events. Vaughn's expression didn't change. Are you suggesting she fabricated an assault that required 6 stitches and left her with bruised ribs? I'm suggesting the situation may have been more nuanced than the initial report indicated. Maya realized with a sickening clarity that this wasn't about the truth. This was about damage control, about protecting the institution from embarrassment, about making sure that if someone went down for this, it was the whistleblower, not the abuser. She looked at Vaughn. Vaughn's eyes were hard. Colonel Harrison, Vaughn said, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I expect a direct answer. Do you believe Staff Sergeant Rollins assaulted Staff Sergeant Torres? Harrison hesitated. I believe an incident occurred. An incident. A physical altercation during a high-stress training evolution, whether it constitutes assault. He kicked her in the head, Vaughn said flatly. He kicked her again in the ribs. He did this in front of 47 witnesses and a lieutenant who immediately called for command presence. What part of that is ambiguous? The context, ma'am. Staff Sergeant Torres had just defied a direct order. Staff Sergeant Rollins was attempting to maintain discipline in a chaotic situation. His methods may have been excessive, but nothing. Vaughn stood. The other officers at the table shifted uncomfortably. You're looking for a way to make this go away, to write it off as a misunderstanding, slap Rollins on the wrist and move on. And I'm telling you right now that's not happening. Harrison's face flushed. Ma'am, I'm trying to conduct a fair investigation. Then investigate. Vaughn's voice cut through the room like a whip. But if you spend one more minute questioning the victim's credibility instead of the perpetrator's actions, I will personally ensure that this review board is dissolved and reconvened under my direct supervision. Am I clear? The silence that followed was absolute. Harrison looked like he'd been slapped. The other officers stared at their files, suddenly fascinated by the paperwork. Yes, ma'am, Harrison said finally. His voice was tight. Vaughn turned to Maya. Staff Sergeant, you're dismissed. Wait outside. Maya stood saluted and walked out. Her legs were shaking. Her ribs were on fire. She made it halfway down the hallway before she had to stop and lean against the wall, pressing her forehead to the cold concrete and trying to breathe through the panic clawing at her chest. They were going to bury her. Not officially, not publicly, but quietly through bad evaluations, denied promotions, transfers to dead-end assignments until she got tired and quit. She'd seen it happen to other soldiers who spoke up. The Army didn't court-martial whistleblowers anymore. It just made their lives so miserable they left on their own. Torres. She looked up. Lieutenant Morrison was standing at the end of the hallway, his face pale. "You okay?" he asked. Maya pushed off the wall. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." "I'm standing. That's close enough." She wiped sweat from her forehead and winced as her hand brushed the stitches. "What are you doing here?" "They called me in. Wanted my statement." Morrison glanced at the door she'd just come from. "It's bad, isn't it?" "Yeah." "How bad?" Maya met his eyes. "They're trying to make this my fault." Morrison's face went white. "What?" "They're saying I'm difficult, that I have problems with authority, that maybe Rollins was just trying to maintain discipline and things got out of hand. That's insane." "That's the Army." Morrison ran a hand through his hair. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. "I testified yesterday. Told them exactly what I saw. Rollins attacking you twice without provocation. They didn't seem interested." "Because the truth is messy," Maya said. "And admitting the truth means admitting the system is broken. It's easier to blame me." "So what do we do?" Maya looked at him, this young lieutenant who'd risked his career to call for help, who'd stood between her and Rollins, who'd done everything right, and was about to learn that doing the right thing didn't always matter. "We keep telling the truth," she said, "even if no one wants to hear it." Morrison nodded slowly. "Vaughn seems like she's on our side." "She is, but she's one general, and there are a lot of colonels like Harrison who want this to disappear. So we're screwed." "Maybe." Maya started walking again. "Or maybe we're about to find out how many people in this army still have a spine." The door to the review room opened 40 minutes later. General Vaughn stepped out alone, her expression unreadable. "Torres, Morrison, my office, now." They followed her through the bunker back outside into the Georgia heat across the base to headquarters. Vaughn didn't speak the entire walk. She just moved with the kind of controlled fury that made everyone in her path step aside. Her office was on the 3rd floor, spacious but not ostentatious. A desk covered in files. A bookshelf full of Army regulations and leadership manuals. Photos on the wall of soldiers and combat soldiers training soldiers standing at attention with pride in their eyes. Vaughn closed the door and gestured to 2 chairs. "Sit." They sat. Vaughn remained standing. She paced for a moment, then stopped and looked at them. "That review board is compromised," she said flatly. "Colonel Harrison has already decided Rollins is going to get a slap on the wrist, and you, Torres, are going to be labeled a problem." Maya's stomach dropped. "Ma'am." "I'm not finished." Vaughn's eyes were hard. "Harrison is part of the old guard. He believes in the system that produced Rollins, and he's going to protect it even if it means destroying you in the process." "So, what do we do?" Morrison asked. "We go over his head." Morrison blinked. "Ma'am?" "I'm convening a second investigation under the authority of the Inspector General's office. Independent review, no local command influence, full transparency." Vaughn turned to Maya. "But I need more than your testimony. I need evidence, documentation, patterns. I need to prove this isn't one bad day, it's systemic abuse that's been ignored for years." Maya's mind raced. "The base hospital. The doctor I spoke with, she said she's been documenting injuries." Vaughn's expression sharpened. "What doctor?" "I don't know her name, but she treated me after the assault. She said she's seen too many training accidents in the last 6 months. She's been keeping records." Vaughn pulled out her phone and made a call. It was brief, clipped, and efficient. "Dr. Ellen Reyes," Vaughn said when she hung up. "Chief of Emergency Medicine, she's coming here." 20 minutes later, Dr. Reyes walked into the office carrying a laptop and a stack of manila folders, thick enough to use as a weapon. She looked at Vaughn, then at Maya, then back at Vaughn. "I was wondering when someone would finally ask," Reyes said. She set the laptop on the desk and opened it. Files appeared on the screen, medical records, injury reports, photographs. Dozens of them. "Over the last 18 months, Reyes said, I've treated 63 recruits for injuries that didn't match the explanations given. Fractures from falls that looked more like impacts. Contusions in patterns consistent with repeated strikes. Dehydration severe enough to cause kidney damage in recruits who claimed they forgot to drink water." Vaughn's face was stone. "Why didn't you report this?" "I did, 7 times. To Captain Brennan, to the base medical commander, to the safety office. Every report was dismissed as training hazards or recruit error." Reyes's voice was bitter. "I was told I was being alarmist, that I didn't understand the physical demands of modern training, that maybe I wasn't cut out for military medicine." "Jesus," Morrison whispered. Reyes pulled up another file. "This is Private First Class David Chen, 19 years old. Came in 3 months ago with a broken wrist. Said he fell during an obstacle course, but the break was defensive, the kind you see when someone raises their hand to block a blow." She clicked to the next image. "This is Private Jessica Ruiz. Heat stroke so severe she seized in my ER. She'd been denied water for 6 hours during a discipline exercise." Another click. "Private Marcus Webb. 2nd-degree burns on both hands. Said he grabbed a hot pipe during equipment training. The burns were consistent with someone being forced to hold on to something hot." Maya felt sick. Reyes kept going. Image after image, story after story. A catalog of abuse hiding in plain sight, documented by a doctor no one had listened to. "How many of these came from Rollins's unit?" Vaughn asked quietly. Reyes checked her notes. 41, 2/3 of the total. The room went silent. Vaughn looked at Morrison. "Did you know about any of this?" "No, ma'am." Morrison's voice was shaking. "I knew Rollins was harsh, but I thought it was just old-school training. I didn't realize—" "You didn't realize because you weren't supposed to," Vaughn said. "That's how systems like this survive, by convincing good people that what they're seeing is normal." She turned to Reyes. "Doctor, I'm going to need copies of everything, and I'm going to need you to testify." Reyes nodded. "I've been waiting for someone to ask me to do more than just patch up the damage. I'm ready." Vaughn's expression softened slightly. "Thank you." Reyes looked at Maya. "You did the right thing, Staff Sergeant. Don't let them make you doubt that." Maya's throat tightened. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. After Reyes left, Vaughn sat down at her desk and pulled up a document on her computer. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "The IG investigation starts tomorrow. You'll both give full statements. Dr. Reyes will provide her documentation, and I'm going to personally interview every recruit in Rollins' unit separately with no other instructors present." "Harrison's going to fight this," Morrison said. "Let him." Vaughn's smile was cold. "He can explain to the Secretary of the Army why he tried to cover up 18 months of documented abuse." Maya leaned forward. "Ma'am, what happens to us?" "What do you mean? If this goes public, if we're the ones who brought it to light, what happens to our careers?" Vaughn was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was honest in a way that made Maya's chest ache. "I don't know," Vaughn said. "In a perfect army, you'd be commended, promoted, used as an example of courage under pressure. But this isn't a perfect army. There are a lot of people who are going to see you as traitors, who are going to make your lives difficult because you broke the code of silence." "So we're screwed," Maya said flatly. "Maybe. Or maybe you're about to become part of something bigger." Vaughn looked at both of them. "This investigation isn't just about Rollins. It's about changing the culture that created him. And that's going to take soldiers who are willing to stand up even when it's hard." "That's not exactly a reassuring pep talk, ma'am," Morrison said. Vaughn smiled grimly. "I'm not here to reassure you, Lieutenant. I'm here to tell you the truth. And the truth is this is going to get worse before it gets better." She was right. Within 48 hours, the IG investigation was in full swing, and so was the backlash. Maya returned to her quarters one evening to find her door ajar. She pushed it open slowly, her hand moving instinctively to her hip, where her sidearm would be if she were deployed. The room had been tossed, Her locker was open clothes scattered across the floor. Her bunk had been stripped, and on her pillow someone had left a single note written in red marker. Snitches get stitches. Maya stared at the note for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone and took a picture. She'd learned early in her career to document everything. She texted the photo to Vaughn. The response came back within seconds. Pack a bag. You're being moved to secure quarters. Maya didn't argue. She threw her essentials into a duffel bag and walked out. She didn't look back. Looking back would mean acknowledging that she was scared, and she couldn't afford to be scared right now. The secure quarters were in the visiting officer's wing, small but clean, with a door that locked and a window that didn't face the training fields. An MP stood outside. "Ma'am," the MP said when she arrived, "I'm here for your protection." Maya looked at him. He was young, maybe 22, with the kind of earnest face that still believed the army worked the way the recruiting posters said it did. "From who?" Maya asked. "Anyone who wants to send you a message," the MP said quietly. Maya's jaw tightened. She went inside, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands were shaking. She clasped them together, pressed them between her knees, and tried to breathe through the adrenaline crash that was threatening to pull her under. A knock on the door made her jump. "Torres, it's me." "Morrison." She opened the door. He looked worse than she felt, his uniform rumpled, his eyes red-rimmed, a fresh bruise on his jaw. "What happened to you?" Maya asked. "Brennan happened." Morrison touched his jaw and winced. "He cornered me in the parking lot, told me I was a disgrace to the officer corps, said I'd destroyed the career of a good man over nothing." "Did you hit him back?" "I wanted to." Morrison's voice was bitter. "But I knew if I did, they'd use it against me, so I just stood there and took it." Maya stepped aside to let him in. Morrison collapsed into the single chair in the room and put his head in his hands. "I didn't think it would be like this," he said. "What did you think it would be like?" "I don't know. I thought doing the right thing would matter. I thought people would see what Rollins did and be horrified. Instead, half the base is treating us like traitors." Maya sat on the bed across from him. "They're scared." "Of what?" "Of change. Of accountability. Of having to admit they were complicit." She looked at her hands. "It's easier to blame us than to look in the mirror." Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he looked up at her. "Do you regret it?" he asked. Maya thought about Kemper, about the recruits standing in formation, about Dr. Reyes documenting injuries no one else would acknowledge. She thought about the note on her pillow and the bruise on Morrison's jaw and the fact that her entire career might be over before she turned 35. "No," she said. "I don't. Even if it costs you everything." Maya met his eyes. "Especially then." The IG investigation moved fast. Within a week, they'd interviewed 73 people, recruits, instructors, officers, medical staff, administrative personnel. The picture that emerged was damning. Rollins wasn't the only problem. He was just the most visible one. Captain Brennan had systematically dismissed complaints for over a year. Major Patricia Cole, the training command executive officer, had actively discouraged recruits from reporting abuse. Even the base chaplain had been complicit, telling soldiers that suffering builds character and that they should pray instead of complaining. The rot went deeper than anyone had realized. General Chen delivered the preliminary findings to Vaughn in a closed-door meeting. Maya wasn't present, but Morrison was. He'd been designated as a witness coordinator, and he told her everything afterward. "It's bad," Morrison said. "Worse than bad. Catastrophic." They were sitting in a conference room in the headquarters building, surrounded by boxes of evidence and testimony transcripts. "How catastrophic?" Maya asked. "Chen wants to recommend criminal charges against Rollins, administrative separation for Brennan, letters of reprimand for Cole and 4 other officers, and he wants a complete overhaul of training protocols across the entire base." Maya absorbed this. Harrison's going to lose his mind. Harrison already lost his mind. He submitted a formal protest to Chen's findings, said the investigation was biased and the evidence was circumstantial. Except it's not. Except it's not. Morrison agreed. Chen has medical records, witness statements, and a pattern of behavior spanning 18 months. Harrison doesn't have a leg to stand on. So what's he going to do? Morrison's expression darkened. He's going to appeal to higher command. Try to get the investigation shut down before the findings become official. Maya felt ice in her stomach. Can he do that? He can try. And if he has enough friends in the right places, he might succeed. Then we're back where we started. No, Morrison shook his head. Because Vaughn isn't going to let that happen. She told Chen that if command tries to bury this, she's going to the press. Maya's eyes widened. She said that in front of me and 3 other witnesses. Morrison smiled grimly. I've never seen a general threaten to blow up her own career like that. It was terrifying and inspiring at the same time. Maya leaned back in her chair. She felt exhausted, wrung out like she'd been running on adrenaline for so long that her body had forgotten how to rest. What happens now? She asked. Now we wait. Chen's submitting his final report in 48 hours. Command has 72 hours to respond. And then, Morrison shrugged. Then we find out if the Army still believes in justice. 60 hours later, the base exploded. Not literally, but close. The final IG report was released to command, and within minutes it had leaked to every major news outlet in the country. Maya found out when her phone started buzzing with notifications texts from old friends, former patients, people she hadn't spoken to in years, all asking the same question. Is it true? She opened her news app. The headline stared back at her. Army Training Base under investigation for systemic abuse. Decorated medic assaulted after trying to save recruit. Below it, a photo. Her photo. Service portrait from 2 years ago, smiling in her dress uniform. Maya's hands went numb. They leaked your name, Morrison said. He was standing in her doorway, his phone in his hand, his face pale. I can see that. I'm sorry. Don't be. Maya set her phone down. At least now it's out in the open. But she was lying. Because having her name attached to this story meant she was now a public figure, a symbol, a target. Every decision she'd made, every word she'd spoken, every moment of her career was now subject to public scrutiny. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Staff Sergeant Torres. Is it true you're trying to destroy an innocent man's career? Maya hung up. The phone rang again. Another unknown number. Did Rollins really assault you, or are you just looking for attention? She blocked the number. Another call. How much are the liberals paying you to lie? Maya turned off her phone. Morrison watched her. This is going to get worse. I know. Vaughn wants to see you. Says she can get you protection. A media liaison. Maybe even a lawyer. Maya stood. Her ribs ached. Her head throbbed. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the only question was whether she'd jump or be pushed. Let's go, she said. Vaughn's office was chaos. Staff officers moved through the hallways like ghosts, their faces grim. Phones rang constantly. Someone was shouting behind a closed door. Vaughn was waiting in her office with General Chen and a woman Maya didn't recognize. Mid-40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. Torres Morrison, this is Sarah Vance, Vaughn said. She's a military attorney specializing in whistleblower protection. Vance stood and shook their hands. I've reviewed your case. You're both in a precarious position. We noticed, Maya said. Vance didn't smile. The leak of the IG report was deliberate. Someone in command wants this story public because they think it will pressure leadership to act. But it also means you're now exposed. Every reporter in the country is going to want to interview you. Every conspiracy theorist is going to have a theory. And everyone who benefits from the old system is going to come after you. Great, Morrison muttered. But, Vance continued, you also have leverage. Public opinion is on your side. The evidence is overwhelming. And General Vaughn has made it clear she's willing to fight for you. Vaughn nodded. I'm recommending you both for commendations. And I'm personally ensuring that any retaliation against you results in immediate action. Maya looked at her. Ma'am, with respect, I don't want a commendation. I want this to actually change something. It will, Vaughn said. The Secretary of the Army has already ordered a review of training protocols at every installation in the continental U.S. Rollins is being court-martialed. Brennan is being discharged. And Harrison is being reassigned. Maya felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief. Not yet. But something close. When? She asked. The court-martial starts in 2 weeks, Vaughn said. And you're the primary witness. 2 weeks felt like 2 years. Maya spent the first 3 days preparing her testimony with Sarah Vance, going over every detail of that morning until the words lost all meaning. She described the kick, the second kick, Kemper's collapse. Rollins' voice, the blood in her mouth. Over and over. Vance made her practice staying calm, staying factual, not letting emotion creep into her voice. The defense is going to try to rattle you, Vance said. They'll suggest you misinterpreted the situation, that you were insubordinate, that Rollins was justified in using physical correction. Physical correction, Maya repeated. The words tasted like poison. That's what they're calling it. Not assault. Correction. Vance's expression was grim. They're going to paint Rollins as a dedicated instructor pushed too far by a difficult subordinate, and they're going to paint you as someone with a history of challenging authority. I do have a history of challenging authority. I know, and we're going to own that. Vance leaned forward. We're going to show that every time you challenged authority, it was because you were protecting soldiers, saving lives, doing your job. That's not insubordination, that's leadership. Maya wanted to believe her, but she'd seen too many military trials go sideways, too many good soldiers destroyed by lawyers who knew how to twist the truth into something unrecognizable. On the 4th day, Morrison showed up at her quarters with news that made her stomach drop. Rollins' defense team just filed a motion to exclude Dr. Reyes' testimony, he said. They're claiming it's prejudicial and irrelevant to the specific incident. Maya felt her chest tighten. Those medical records prove a pattern. Without them, it's your word against Rollins. Morrison ran a hand through his hair. And his attorney is Edward Klein, former JAG officer, now private practice. He's won 12 military cases in the last 2 years, all acquittals. Of course he has. Vance is fighting the motion, but if the judge allows it, then we're screwed. Morrison didn't argue. They both knew it was true. That night, Maya lay awake in her quarters staring at the ceiling. The MP was still outside her door. She could hear him shifting occasionally, his boots scuffing against the concrete. She wondered if he knew what he was protecting her from. Whether he understood that the real danger wasn't physical violence, it was the slow, methodical destruction of her credibility, her career, her life. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You're making a mistake. Drop this before it's too late. Maya deleted it, but her hands were shaking. Another text. Different number. Your parents must be so proud of their traitor daughter. Delete. Another. Hope you like being unemployed. Delete. Another. Women like you are why the army is going soft. Maya turned off her phone, but she couldn't turn off her mind. The messages kept playing on repeat, mixing with her own doubts, her own fears, until she couldn't tell which thoughts were hers and which had been planted by people who wanted her to break. At 0300, she gave up on sleep. She got dressed, slipped past the MP with a muttered excuse about needing air, and walked through the empty base until she found herself standing outside the training field where it had all happened. The field was dark, quiet, undisturbed, no recruits, no instructors, just red Georgia clay and the ghosts of what had happened there. Maya stepped onto the field. Her boots crunched in the dirt. She walked to the spot where Kemper had collapsed, where she'd knelt beside him, where Rollins's boot had connected with her skull. The memory hit her like a physical blow. The taste of copper, the sound of silence, the feeling of gravel digging into her palms. You shouldn't be here. Maya spun around. General Vaughn was standing at the edge of the field, her uniform replaced by civilian clothes, jeans, and a plain gray shirt. She looked smaller somehow, more human. Ma'am, I couldn't sleep either. Vaughn walked onto the field and stood beside her. I keep thinking about all the soldiers who stood here before you, all the ones who got hurt and said nothing, who convinced themselves it was normal. Maya's throat tightened. How many were there? Too many. Vaughn was quiet for a moment. I joined the Army 32 years ago. Back then, hazing was just called training. If you complained, you were weak. If you broke, you deserved it. I watched good soldiers get destroyed by that mentality, and I told myself it was just the way things were. What changed? I became a commander, and I realized I could either perpetuate the cycle or break it. Vaughn looked at her. You're breaking it, Torres, and it's going to hurt, but it matters. What if they destroy me? Maya's voice cracked. What if I testify and they still acquit him? What if nothing changes? Then you'll know you tried, and that's more than most people can say. Vaughn put a hand on her shoulder. I've been doing this a long time, Staff Sergeant, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, courage isn't about winning. It's about standing up when you know you might lose. Maya blinked against the tears building in her eyes. I'm scared. Good. That means you understand what's at stake. Vaughn squeezed her shoulder once, then let go. Get some sleep. The court-martial starts in 10 days, and you need to be ready. The judge denied the motion to exclude Dr. Reyes' testimony on day 7. Vance called Maya with the news at 0600, her voice tight with relief. We got it. All of it. The medical records, the pattern evidence, everything. Maya sat up in bed. How? The judge said that establishing a pattern of behavior is relevant to determining intent. Rollins' attorney tried to argue it was prejudicial, but the judge shut him down. For the first time in weeks, Maya felt something like hope. So what happens now? Now we prepare to bury him. But Klein wasn't finished. On day 8, Rollins' defense team released a statement to the press. Maya saw it on the news while eating breakfast in the secure quarters. A reporter stood outside the base gates reading from a prepared statement. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rollins maintains his innocence and looks forward to clearing his name. His attorney Edward Klein released the following statement. Staff Sergeant Rollins is a decorated combat veteran who has dedicated his life to training America's soldiers. The allegations against him are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of military training protocols and are being driven by individuals with a personal and political agenda to undermine traditional Army values. Maya set down her coffee. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. Traditional Army values. That was the line they were going with, that she was some kind of radical trying to destroy the institution from within. Her phone rang. Morrison. Did you see it? He asked. Yeah. Vance says it's a PR move. They're trying to win in the court of public opinion before the trial even starts. Is it working? Morrison hesitated. Social media is split. Half the country thinks you're a hero. The other half thinks you're trying to ruin a good man's life. Maya closed her eyes. Great. There's more. Klein just subpoenaed your personnel file. Every evaluation, every fitness report, every disciplinary action from your entire career. I don't have any disciplinary actions. I know, but they're going to comb through everything looking for ammunition. Anytime you disagreed with a superior, anytime you pushed back, anytime I did my job. Maya's voice was flat. Yeah. She hung up and stared at her reflection in the window. She looked exhausted. Older. Like she'd aged a decade in 3 weeks. A knock on the door. The MP. Ma'am, you have a visitor. Maya opened the door. Dr. Reyes stood in the hallway holding 2 cups of coffee. Figured you could use this, Reyes said. Maya took the coffee. Thank you. Reyes stepped inside and closed the door. I testified in the preliminary hearing yesterday. Thought you should know what to expect. How bad was it? Klein tried to discredit me. Said I was exaggerating injuries to support a narrative, that I had no proof the injuries were intentional. Reyes's jaw tightened. He suggested I was a overly sympathetic doctor who couldn't handle the realities of military training. Maya felt anger flare in her chest. What did you say? I said I'd been treating combat casualties for 15 years, and I knew the difference between a training injury and an assault. Then I pulled up photos of Private Chen's defensive fracture, and asked Klein to explain how someone breaks their wrist that way, falling off an obstacle. Reyes smiled grimly. He couldn't. Did the judge believe you? She did. But Klein's good. He planted enough doubt that some people in that courtroom started questioning whether I was being objective. Reyes looked at Maya. He's going to do the same thing to you. He's going to make you doubt yourself, your memory, your motives. You need to be ready. Maya nodded slowly. I am, but she wasn't sure she believed it. Down. The night before the court-martial, Maya couldn't eat. She sat in her quarters with Morrison and Vance going over her testimony one last time, but the words kept sliding out of her brain before she could hold on to them. Torres, you need to focus, Vance said. I am focused. No, you're panicking, Vance's voice softened. Look at me. You know what happened. You were there. Rollins assaulted you in front of 47 witnesses. That's not ambiguous, that's fact. Klein's going to twist it. Let him try. We have the truth. Vance closed her laptop. Get some sleep. Tomorrow you're going to walk into that courtroom and tell your story. And then we're going to let the evidence speak for itself. After they left, Maya lay down and closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come. Instead, she found herself back on that training field, feeling the boot connect with her temple, tasting blood, hearing the silence. She jerked awake at 200 from a nightmare she couldn't remember. Her shirt was soaked with sweat. Her ribs ached. She got up, drank water, paced the small room until the sun started to rise. At 0600, she put on her dress uniform. The fabric felt foreign after weeks of avoiding formal occasions. She pinned her ribbons with shaking hands. Bronze Star, Purple Heart Army Commendation Medal with Valor Combat Medical Badge. 14 commendations earned in blood and fire, and none of them would matter if she couldn't hold herself together for the next 8 hours. The court-martial was being held in a building Maya had never entered, before a formal courtroom with wood paneling and a judge's bench that looked like something out of a civilian courthouse. Members of the panel sat in a row, 6 officers, a mix of ranks and backgrounds, all watching with expressions that gave nothing away. Rollins sat at the defense table in his dress uniform, his ribbons gleaming, his face calm. He looked like the poster child for Army values. Strong, confident, unbothered. Maya wanted to scream. Vance touched her arm. Breathe. Maya breathed. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The trial began. Klein gave his opening statement first, and it was a masterclass in manipulation. He talked about Rollins's 22 years of service, his deployments, his sacrifices. He painted a picture of a dedicated instructor overwhelmed by a chaotic situation, forced to make split-second decisions to maintain order and discipline. Staff Sergeant Rollins did not assault Staff Sergeant Torres, Klein said. His voice was smooth, reasonable. He made physical contact with her in the course of enforcing discipline during a high-stress training evolution. Was it ideal? No. But it was not criminal. And the prosecution's attempt to paint this decorated soldier as an abuser is nothing more than a politically motivated attack on traditional military training standards. Maya's hands clenched in her lap. Then Vance stood. And when she spoke, her voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. This case is not about training standards. It's about assault. It's about a senior NCO kicking a fellow NCO in the head and ribs because she refused to let a recruit die. Vance turned to the panel. The defense wants you to believe this was a split-second decision, but the evidence will show a pattern of abuse spanning 18 months. Documented injuries, silenced complaints, a system that protected the abuser and punished the victims. And when Staff Sergeant Torres finally said enough, she was punished for it. Vance paused, but she didn't stay silent. And because of her courage, we're here today, ready to hold someone accountable. The first witness was Lieutenant Morrison. He walked through his testimony with nervous precision, arriving at the field, seeing Kemper collapse, watching Maya move to help, seeing Rollins kick her. Klein cross-examined him aggressively. Lieutenant, how far away were you when the alleged assault occurred? Approximately 30 meters, sir. And it was a hot day. Correct heat, shimmer dust. Lots of movement. Yes, sir. So it's possible you misinterpreted what you saw. Morrison's jaw tightened. No, sir. I saw Staff Sergeant Rollins kick Staff Sergeant Torres in the head. There was no misinterpretation. But you'd only been at Camp Harrison for 3 weeks. You didn't understand the training culture. You didn't know how things were done. I understood that assault is illegal regardless of culture, sir. Klein smiled like Morrison had just walked into a trap. So, you admit there was a culture at Camp Harrison that involved physical discipline. Morrison hesitated. Vance stood. Objection. Counsel is conflating discipline with assault. Sustained, the judge said. Rephrase, Mr. Klein. Klein moved on, but the damage was done. He'd planted the idea that what happened was part of a larger culture, that Rollins was just following established norms. Next came 3 recruits from the platoon. Each one testified to seeing the assault. Each one described the fear, the silence, the months of abuse that led up to that moment. Klein tried to shake them. He suggested they were biased, that they'd been coached by Maya, that they were exaggerating to avoid taking responsibility for their own failures. Private Cross broke down on the stand. She was sobbing as she described Rollins locking Private Jensen in a storage room, as she talked about the constant fear, the way they'd all learned to just endure. Did Staff Sergeant Torres ever tell you to lie? Klein asked. No, sir, Cross said through tears. She told us to tell the truth. She said it was the only way things would change. And did she promise you anything in exchange for your testimony? No, sir. She didn't promise us anything except that she'd fight for us. When Cross stepped down, half the courtroom looked ready to cry with her. But Klein looked satisfied. He'd gotten what he wanted, the appearance that Maya had influenced the recruit's testimony. Then Dr. Reyes took the stand. She was unshakable. She walked through the medical records with clinical precision, explaining each injury, each inconsistency, each pattern that pointed to intentional harm rather than training accidents. Klein tried to rattle her. He questioned her objectivity, her experience, her ability to distinguish between different types of injuries. Doctor, isn't it true that you can't definitively prove these injuries were intentional? I can prove they're consistent with intentional harm and inconsistent with the explanations given, Reyes said calmly. A defensive fracture doesn't happen from falling off an obstacle. Burns in that pattern don't happen from accidentally touching a hot pipe. And heat stroke requiring emergency intervention doesn't happen when proper hydration protocols are followed. But you can't prove Staff Sergeant Rollins caused these injuries. 41 of the 63 injuries I documented came from his unit. That's not coincidence. That's pattern. Klein shifted tactics. Doctor, are you aware that Staff Sergeant Torres has filed several complaints about training procedures during her time at Camp Harrison? Yes. Would you say she has a history of being critical of her colleagues? Reyes leaned forward. I'd say she has a history of protecting soldiers, which is exactly what a medic should do. The courtroom buzzed. The judge called for order. Finally, at 1400 on the second day, Vance called Maya to the stand. Maya walked forward on legs that felt like water. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. The courtroom was silent. Every eye was on her. Vance started gently. Basic questions. Name, rank, service history. Combat deployments. Commendations. A litany of achievements that established her as a credible, experienced soldier. Then Vance moved to that morning. Staff Sergeant Torres, can you describe what happened on the training field? Maya took a breath. Private Kemper collapsed from heat exhaustion. I assessed him and determined he needed immediate medical attention. Staff Sergeant Rollins ordered me not to treat him. I refused. Then he kicked me in the head. Where exactly did he kick you? Maya touched her temple. Here. Then when I tried to help Kemper again, he kicked me in the ribs. Did you fight back? No, ma'am. Why not? Because my priority was saving Kemper's life, and because fighting back would have given Rollins justification for further violence. Vance nodded. What happened after the assault? Maya walked through the rest. Lieutenant Morrison calling for help, the generals arriving, the hospital, the investigation. Her voice stayed steady, factual, clinical. Then Klein stood for cross-examination, and everything changed. Staff Sergeant Torres, you filed 7 formal complaints during your 8 months at Camp Harrison. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Would you say you have difficulty accepting authority? Maya's jaw tightened. No, sir. I have difficulty accepting abuse. But you've disagreed with multiple superiors, questioned their decisions, refused orders. I've questioned orders that violated regulations or put soldiers at risk. Klein pulled out a document. Your evaluation from Afghanistan describes you as emotionally invested and resistant to command decisions. Would you say that's accurate? I was invested in keeping my patients alive, sir, even when that meant disregarding triage protocols, even when it meant prioritizing one soldier over mission objectives. Maya felt her chest tighten. I'm a medic, sir. My mission is saving lives. And you believe that mission supersedes the chain of command. I believe that mission is the chain of command. Klein smiled. So you admit you prioritize your own judgment over your superiors. Vance stood. Objection. Argumentative. Withdrawn. Klein turned back to Maya. Staff Sergeant, on the morning in question, Staff Sergeant Rollins gave you a direct order not to treat Private Kemper. You refused. Correct? Yes, sir. So you were insubordinate? No, sir. I was following my duty as a medic. Denying necessary medical care is illegal. But you made that determination, not Staff Sergeant Rollins, not the chain of command. You. Maya's hands clenched. Kemper was going into heat stroke. I didn't need permission to save his life. But by refusing a direct order, you created a confrontation. You escalated the situation. I didn't escalate anything. I tried to do my job. And when Staff Sergeant Rollins attempted to maintain discipline, you continued to defy him. He didn't attempt to maintain discipline. He assaulted me. Klein's expression didn't change. Or did he make physical contact in an attempt to enforce an order you were refusing to follow? Maya felt something crack inside her. The careful control she'd been maintaining for weeks, the clinical detachment, the calm facade, it all shattered. He kicked me in the head, she said. Her voice was shaking. He kicked me again in the ribs. He did it in front of 47 recruits who were too terrified to move, and you're standing here trying to make it sound like I deserved it because I wouldn't let a kid die. The courtroom went silent. Klein opened his mouth. Maya kept going. I've served this army for 12 years. I've pulled wounded soldiers out of firefights. I've worked 20-hour shifts in field hospitals. I've held dying men's hands and told them they were going home when I knew they weren't. And I did all of that because I believe in this institution. Because I believe we're supposed to be better than our enemies. But standing here being cross-examined like I'm the criminal. Her voice cracked. It makes me wonder if I was wrong. Vance was on her feet. Your Honor, I think Staff Sergeant Torres needs a recess. The judge nodded. We'll take 15 minutes. Maya walked off the stand on shaking legs. Vance guided her out of the courtroom and into a small conference room. That was either brilliant or catastrophic, Vance said. I can't tell which. Maya put her head in her hands. I lost control. No, you got real. Vance sat beside her. The panel needed to see your humanity. They needed to understand this isn't just about facts and regulations, it's about a soldier who tried to do the right thing and got punished for it. Klein's gonna eat me alive when we go back in there. Maybe. Or maybe you just won this case. They returned to the courtroom. Maya sat back on the stand. Klein approached her carefully like she was something volatile. Staff Sergeant Torres, I have just one more question. Maya met his eyes. Do you hate Staff Sergeant Rollins? The question hung in the air. Maya thought about it. About the kick, the pain, the fear. About the recruits' faces. About Kemper lying in the dirt. No, sir, she said quietly. I pity him. Klein blinked. You pity him? Yes, sir, because he spent 22 years in the army and never learned that strength isn't about breaking people. It's about building them up. And now he's going to lose everything because he confused cruelty with leadership. Klein stared at her. For the first time all trial, he looked uncertain. No further questions, he said. The panel deliberated for 6 hours. Maya spent every minute of those 6 hours in a conference room with Morrison and Vance, unable to sit still, unable to think about anything except the 6 faces that would decide her future. Not just Rollins's future, hers. Because if the panel acquitted him, if they decided that what he did was acceptable, then Maya would be labeled forever as the soldier who cried wolf, the troublemaker, the woman who couldn't hack it. "Stop pacing," Vance said without looking up from her laptop. "You're making me anxious." "I can't help it. They're going to convict. The evidence is overwhelming." "You don't know that." "I do know that." Vance finally looked at her. "I've been doing this for 15 years. I know when a case is solid. This is solid." Morrison was sitting in the corner, his head back against the wall, eyes closed. He hadn't spoken in over an hour. Maya couldn't tell if he was asleep or just pretending to be. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. "You should have kept your mouth shut." Delete. Another buzz. "They're going to destroy you." Delete. Another. "I hope it was worth it." Maya turned off her phone and threw it on the table. Vance glanced at it but didn't comment. "How much longer?" Maya asked. "As long as it takes." Vance closed her laptop. 6 hours is actually a good sign. If they were going to acquit, they would have done it fast. The fact that they're taking time means they're being thorough. Or it means they're trying to find a way to acquit without looking like they're protecting him. Vance didn't argue with that. They both knew it was possible. At 1847, the bailiff knocked on the door. "They're ready." Maya's stomach dropped. Morrison opened his eyes. Vance stood and straightened her uniform. "Let's go." They walked back into the courtroom. The panel was already seated. Rollins was at the defense table, his face unreadable. Klein looked confident. Too confident. Maya sat down. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together in her lap. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. "Has the panel reached a verdict?" the judge asked. The president of the panel, a colonel named Matthews, stood. "We have, Your Honor." "Please read the verdict." Matthews picked up a piece of paper. His hands were steady. His voice was clear. "On the charge of assault against a fellow service member, we find the defendant, Staff Sergeant Marcus Rollins, guilty." The courtroom erupted. Maya couldn't breathe. She heard the word guilty, but her brain couldn't process it, couldn't accept that it was real. Rollins stood frozen at the defense table. Klein was already moving, objecting to something, demanding a poll of the panel. The judge was banging her gavel, calling for order. Morrison grabbed Maya's arm. "We won." Maya turned to look at him. His face was flushed, his eyes bright. He looked like he might cry. "We won," he said again. Vance was smiling, actually smiling, and for a woman who never showed emotion, it was startling. "Damn right we did," Vance said. The judge polled the panel. Each member confirmed the verdict. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 6 voices, 6 confirmations, no dissent. Rollins sat down slowly. His face had gone gray. The judge set a sentencing hearing for the following week and dismissed the court. Maya walked out of the courtroom in a daze, barely aware of the reporters shouting questions, the cameras flashing, the press of bodies trying to get close to her. Vance and Morrison flanked her, pushing through the crowd, guiding her to a waiting vehicle. She climbed in and stared out the window as they drove away from the courthouse. "You okay?" Morrison asked. Maya didn't answer. She didn't know if she was okay. She felt hollowed out, like someone had reached inside her and removed everything that used to be there, leaving only an empty space where her fear and anger and exhaustion used to live. They took her back to the secure quarters. Vance stayed long enough to give her a brief rundown of what came next. Sentencing, appeals, media statements, but Maya barely heard any of it. When Vance finally left, Maya sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her hands. They'd won. Rollins was guilty. The system had worked. So why did she feel like she'd lost something? Morrison knocked on her door an hour later with food from the dining facility. She hadn't eaten all day, but her stomach rebelled at the sight of it. "You need to eat something," Morrison said. "I can't." "Torres." I said I can't. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. She took a breath. Sorry, I need to process this. Morrison set the food on the table. Take your time. I'll be right outside if you need me. After he left, Maya lay down on the bed and closed her eyes. She expected to feel relief, vindication, something other than this crushing emptiness. Instead, she felt exhausted. Her phone, she'd turned it back on without thinking, buzzed constantly. Messages poured in. Congratulations. Support. Hate. Everything blurred together until she stopped reading them. One message stood out. It was from Dr. Reyes. You did it. Now rest. Maya set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. She'd done it. She'd stood up, testified, forced the system to acknowledge what had happened. And Rollins had been convicted. But the cost kept mounting in her head. The threats, the sleepless nights, the way half the army now saw her as a hero and the other half as a traitor. The knowledge that her career would never be the same, that every assignment from now on would be colored by this case, that she'd always be that medic who testified against Rollins. Was it worth it? She thought about Kemper, about Private Cross sobbing on the stand, about the 41 injuries Dr. Reyes had documented, about the recruits who'd lived in fear for months because the system had failed them. Yes, it was worth it. Even if it destroyed her, it was worth it. The sentencing hearing happened 5 days later. The courtroom was packed, more reporters, more spectators, more eyes watching to see how far the Army was willing to go. Klein made a plea for leniency. He talked about Rollins' service, his deployments, his family. He showed photos of Rollins with his wife and 2 kids. He presented letters from former soldiers who'd served under Rollins and credited him with making them better. Staff Sergeant Rollins made a mistake, Klein said, a serious mistake, but it was one moment in a 22-year career of service and sacrifice. He deserves a chance to make amends, to rebuild, to prove that he's more than the worst thing he's ever done. It was a good speech. Compelling. Almost convincing. Then Vance stood. Your Honor, the defense would have you believe this was one moment, one mistake. But the evidence shows 18 months of systematic abuse, 41 documented injuries, complaints that were dismissed, soldiers who were silenced. Vance's voice was hard. Staff Sergeant Rollins had 22 years to prove he was more than his worst moment. Instead, he spent those years becoming his worst moment, repeatedly, deliberately, without remorse. She turned to the panel. This isn't about destroying a soldier. It's about accountability, about sending a message that the Army will not tolerate abuse, no matter how decorated the abuser. That soldiers who speak up will be protected, not punished. That we are better than this. The judge asked Maya if she wanted to make a statement. Maya stood, every eye in the courtroom fixed on her. I don't want to destroy Staff Sergeant Rollins, she said quietly. I don't take any joy in this, but I think about Private Kemper lying in that dirt. I think about the recruits who were too scared to speak up. I think about all the soldiers who came before them and suffered in silence because the system told them that what they were experiencing was normal. She paused. Rollins didn't just assault me. He betrayed everything this uniform is supposed to represent. And if we don't hold him accountable, we're telling every abuser in this army that they can get away with it as long as they have enough friends in high places. She sat down. Her hands were steady. Her voice had been steady. She'd said what needed to be said. The panel deliberated for 90 minutes. When they returned, Colonel Matthews read the sentence. Reduction in rank to private, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, confinement for 3 years, bad conduct discharge. Rollins's wife started crying. His attorney immediately began preparing an appeal. But none of it mattered. The sentence was delivered. The case was closed. Maya walked out of the courtroom and into the Georgia heat. The air felt different somehow, lighter. Like a weight she'd been carrying had finally been lifted. Morrison was waiting outside. 3 years, bad conduct discharge, that's real accountability. Maya nodded. She felt numb. Not happy, not sad, just numb. What happens now? She asked. Now, Morrison looked at her. Now you become a symbol." He was right. Within hours, the verdict and sentencing were national news. Maya's face was on every major outlet. Her story was trending on social media. Think pieces were being written about toxic leadership, military culture, the treatment of women in uniform. Everyone had an opinion about her. Some called her a hero. Others called her a disgrace. Advocacy groups held her up as an example of courage. Veterans groups denounced her as someone who didn't understand military discipline. Politicians used her story to push their agendas. Reporters camped outside the base gates hoping for an interview. Maya refused them all. She stayed in the secure quarters, ignored her phone, and tried to figure out what came next. Because the trial was over, but her life wasn't. She still had to exist in this army. Still had to work with people who might see her as either a hero or a traitor. Still had to figure out how to move forward when everything felt broken. General Vaughn called her 3 days after the sentencing. "How are you holding up?" Vaughn asked. "I'm fine, ma'am." "Don't lie to me, Torres." Maya was quiet for a moment. "I don't know how I am." "That's honest." Vaughn sighed. "I'm calling because I need to discuss your next assignment." Maya's chest tightened. "My next assignment? You can't stay at Camp Harrison. Too much attention, too many people with grudges. I'm recommending you for a transfer to Fort Sam Houston. They need experienced medic instructors, and you'd be working under a commander I trust." "Is that what you want me to do?" "It's what I think is best for you," Vaughn said. "But ultimately, it's your choice." Maya thought about it. Fort Sam Houston. A fresh start. A chance to get away from the reporters and the stares and the constant reminders of what had happened. But it also felt like running. "What if I don't want to leave?" Maya asked. Vaughn was quiet. "Then you'll stay. But it won't be easy. There are still people on this base who hate what you did, who think you're a traitor, who will make your life hell if given the chance. I'm used to people trying to make my life hell. I know you are, but there's a difference between enduring and healing." Vaughn's voice softened. "You've been fighting for so long, Torres. You've earned the right to rest." Maya leaned back against the wall. "I don't know how to rest." "Then learn, because if you don't, this is going to consume you." After the call ended, Maya sat in silence. She thought about everything that had happened, the kick, the trial, the verdict. She thought about the recruits whose lives might be different now because she'd spoken up. She thought about the soldiers who would come after them, who might train in an environment that valued them instead of breaking them. That had to count for something. But Vaughn was right. She was exhausted, hollowed out. If she didn't step back, if she didn't give herself time to heal, she was going to shatter completely. She called Morrison. "I'm taking the transfer," she said when he answered. "To Fort Sam." "Yeah." Morrison was quiet. "I'm going to miss you. You'll survive. Will you?" Maya smiled faintly. "Ask me in 6 months." The announcement came 2 days later. Staff Sergeant Maya Torres was being reassigned to Fort Sam Houston effective immediately. She would serve as senior medic instructor in the Combat Medic Training Program. The same day, the Army released a statement announcing comprehensive reforms to training protocols across all installations, mandatory ethics training for all instructors, anonymous reporting systems for abuse, independent oversight of training environments, regular audits of medical records to identify patterns of injury. The statement mentioned Maya by name, praised her courage, called her an example of Army values. Maya read it and felt nothing. She packed her belongings, which weren't many, and prepared to leave Camp Harrison. On her last night on base, she walked back to the training field one final time. It was empty, quiet, just red clay and the memory of what had happened there. She stood in the spot where she'd knelt beside Kemper and closed her eyes. She could still feel the heat, still taste the blood, still hear the silence. But she could also feel something else now, something she hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. Not complete, not permanent, but there. "Thought I'd find you here." Maya opened her eyes. General Vaughn was standing at the edge of the field. "Just saying goodbye," Maya said. Vaughn walked over to her. You know, in 32 years, I've met maybe a dozen soldiers who had the courage to do what you did. Most of them paid for it. Bad assignments, stalled careers, retaliation they could never prove. Is this supposed to make me feel better? No, it's supposed to prepare you. Vaughn looked at her. You're going to have a target on your back for the rest of your career. People are going to test you, challenge you, try to break you. Because if they can break you, they can discredit everything you stood for. Maya's jaw tightened. They're not going to break me. I know they're not. Because you're not just stubborn, you're right. And being right is the most powerful weapon you have. Vaughn pulled something from her pocket and handed it to Maya. I wanted to give you this before you left. It was a coin, not a unit coin, a personal challenge coin with Vaughn's insignia on one side and a single word engraved on the other, courage. I give these to soldiers who remind me why I stay in this army, Vaughn said, who prove that the system can still produce people worth fighting for. Maya's throat tightened. Ma'am, Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep being the kind of leader this army needs. Vaughn squeezed her shoulder once. And if you ever need anything, you call me. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Vaughn nodded and walked away, leaving Maya alone on the field with the coin in her hand. Maya looked at it for a long moment. Then she slipped it into her pocket, turned, and walked off the field for the last time. Fort Sam Houston was different. Not perfect, not free from problems, but different. The commander, Colonel Sarah Jennings, met Maya on her first day and shook her hand firmly. I know who you are, Jennings said. I know what you did, and I want you to know that here speaking up is expected, not punished. We have zero tolerance for hazing, abuse, or retaliation. If you see something wrong, you report it. No questions asked. Maya nodded. Understood, ma'am. Good. Now let's get you to work. The students were different too. Older, more serious, many of them prior service soldiers retraining as medics. They treated Maya with respect that bordered on reverence, not because she was their instructor, but because they knew her story, because she'd become a symbol. It was uncomfortable at first. Maya didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to teach. But slowly she began to understand that being a symbol meant something to these soldiers. It meant that speaking up was possible, that standing against abuse was worth it, that courage mattered. One evening, 3 weeks into her assignment, a young specialist named Davis approached her after class. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Sure. Davis hesitated. How did you do it? Stand up like that when everyone was telling you to stay quiet? Maya thought about the question. Really thought about it. I didn't have a choice, she said finally. There was a kid dying in front of me. And if I'd stayed quiet, if I'd let him die to avoid making waves, I wouldn't have been able to live with myself. But you lost so much. Your reputation, your career trajectory. People hate you. Some people hate me, Maya corrected. But some people respect me. And the ones who respect me are the ones who matter. She looked at Davis. Why are you asking? Davis glanced around to make sure they were alone. I saw something at my last unit. An NCO hitting soldiers. I reported it to my commander, but nothing happened. They moved me to a different platoon and told me to drop it. Maya's chest tightened. Did you? Yeah, I dropped it because I was scared. Davis's voice cracked. And now I hear stories about that NCO still doing the same thing, and I wonder if it's my fault because I didn't push harder. It's not your fault, Maya said firmly. The system failed, not you. But I could have done more. Maybe. Or maybe you would have been destroyed like I almost was. Maya put a hand on Davis's shoulder. The fact that you reported it at all took courage. The fact that you're still thinking about it means you care. That matters. Davis nodded slowly. If I see something again, if I get another chance, I won't stay quiet. Good. And if you need backup, you call me. Understood? Yes, ma'am. After Davis left, Maya sat in the empty classroom and thought about what she'd just promised. That if another soldier needed support, she'd be there. That she'd keep fighting, keep speaking up, keep refusing to let the system protect abusers. It was exhausting, but it was also necessary. Because Rollins wasn't the only abuser in the army. The culture that had produced him still existed. And until that culture changed, really changed fundamentally, changed soldiers like Davis would keep witnessing abuse and wondering if speaking up was worth the cost. Maya pulled out Vaughn's coin and looked at the word engraved on it. Courage. She'd learned something in the last 3 months. Courage wasn't one big moment. It wasn't standing up in front of 47 recruits or testifying in a courtroom or facing down a review board. Courage was every small choice to do the right thing, even when it was hard. Every decision to speak up instead of staying silent. Every moment of standing firm when the pressure to fold was overwhelming. Courage was showing up every day and refusing to let the bastards win. Maya slipped the coin back into her pocket and stood. She had lesson plans to write students to prepare a system to help change one soldier at a time. It wasn't the dramatic ending she might have imagined. There was no ticker tape parade, no medal ceremony, no moment where everyone acknowledged that she'd been right all along. But there was this soldiers like Davis learning that they could speak up. Recruits training in environments that valued them. A system slowly, grudgingly beginning to acknowledge that abuse wasn't discipline and that accountability mattered. It was enough. It had to be enough. Because the fight wasn't over. It would probably never be over. But Maya had learned something important during those weeks at Camp Harrison, during the trial, during the aftermath. She'd learned that she was strong enough to keep fighting, not because she was special or extraordinary or immune to fear, but because she'd decided over and over again, in 1,000 small moments, that standing up was more important than staying comfortable. Her phone buzzed. A text from Morrison. Saw the news. Army's implementing the new protocols at 5 more bases. Your case is changing things. Maya smiled. She typed back a response. Good. Keep me posted. She gathered her things and headed toward her quarters. The Texas heat pressed down on her familiar and heavy. She thought about Georgia, about the red clay and the training field and the moment that had changed everything. She didn't regret it, any of it. Even the pain, even the fear. Even the cost. Because somewhere out there a recruit was training without fear. A medic was speaking up without being punished. A soldier was learning that courage mattered more than compliance. And that was worth everything Maya had sacrificed. She walked through the base as the sun set, thinking about tomorrow's classes, about the students who were counting on her to teach them not just how to save lives, but how to stand up for what was right. It was a heavy responsibility. But Maya had spent her entire career carrying heavy things. This was just one more burden, and she was strong enough to bear it. 6 months passed before Maya realized she was sleeping through the night again. It happened gradually, so slowly she almost didn't notice. First it was 4 hours uninterrupted, then 5, then 6. Until one morning she woke up at 05:30, naturally, without nightmares, without jerking awake in a cold sweat, thinking she was back on that training field. She lay in bed for a moment, testing the feeling. Peace. Actual peace. It felt foreign. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Colonel Jennings. My office. 0700, bring coffee. Maya showed up at 0655 with 2 cups of black coffee from the dining facility. Jennings's office was organized chaos stacks of training manuals, personnel files, a whiteboard covered in scheduling notes. Jennings herself looked tired but satisfied, the kind of exhaustion that came from doing work that mattered. Close the door, Jennings said. Maya did. Her stomach tightened. Those 3 words never preceded good news. Jennings took the coffee and gestured to a chair. I got a call yesterday from the Army Training and Doctrine Command. They're creating a task force to review and reform training protocols across the entire Army. They want subject matter experts. People with experience, credibility, and, she paused, people who've proven they're willing to challenge the status quo. Maya's chest tightened. They want me. They want you. Jennings leaned back. It's a 2-year assignment. You'd be working directly with TRADOC leadership, reviewing everything from drill sergeant selection to instructor certification to abuse reporting mechanisms. Essentially, you'd be helping rewrite how we train soldiers. That's... Maya stopped. She didn't know what it was. Enormous. Terrifying. Exactly what she'd been fighting for. It's a lot, Jennings said, and it won't be easy. You'll be working with people who think the old way was just fine, who see you as a threat, who will fight every change you propose. So basically my normal work environment. Jennings smiled. Basically, but this time you'll have institutional backing, and you'll have a chance to make changes that affect hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Maya stared at her coffee. She thought about Davis, about the recruits at Camp Harrison, about every soldier who'd ever suffered in silence, because the system told them that abuse was normal. When did they need an answer? End of the week. Jennings studied her. Torres, I'm not going to tell you what to do. But I will tell you this, if you don't take this position, they'll find someone else. Someone who might not fight as hard, who might be willing to compromise on things you wouldn't compromise on. That's not exactly pressure-free advice, ma'am. I know, but you've earned the right to hear the truth. Jennings stood. Think about it. Talk to people you trust. And whatever you decide, I'll support you. Maya left the office in a daze. She spent the morning teaching a class on tactical combat casualty care, but her mind was elsewhere. A task force. 2 years. The chance to actually change things on a systemic level. It was everything she'd wanted. So why did it feel like another trap? At lunch, she called Morrison. He'd been promoted to captain and reassigned to the Pentagon, working in personnel policy. They talked every few weeks, comparing notes on their respective bureaucratic nightmares. They offered you the TRADOC position, Morrison said before she could even explain why she was calling. I know. I helped write the recommendation. You what? Someone had to nominate you, and I figured if anyone could actually fix the system, it's the woman who already broke it once. Maya sat down on a bench outside the classroom building. I don't know if I can do this. Why not? Because... She struggled to articulate it. Because I'm tired, James. I'm finally sleeping again. I'm finally teaching without looking over my shoulder. And if I take this position, I'm jumping right back into the fight. You never left the fight, Morrison said quietly. You're still fighting. You're just doing it in a classroom instead of a courtroom. That's different. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, you're training soldiers to speak up, to challenge unsafe practices, to be the kind of medics who won't let people die, to avoid making waves. That sounds like fighting to me. Maya was quiet. He wasn't wrong. What if I fail? She asked. What if I spend 2 years on this task force and nothing changes? Then you'll have tried, which is more than most people can say. Morrison paused. Torres, I've watched you face down generals, testify in a court-martial, and rebuild your entire life after getting your career nearly destroyed. You're not going to fail. You're going to terrify a bunch of colonels who are used to getting their way, and then you're going to change the army whether they like it or not. Despite everything, Maya smiled. You have a lot of faith in me. Someone has to. Might as well be the guy whose career you saved. After they hung up, Maya sat on the bench and watched her students file into the classroom for afternoon session. They were good kids, dedicated, eager to learn. And they deserved an army that would protect them instead of breaking them. She thought about General Vaughn's coin in her pocket, about the word engraved on it. Courage. Courage wasn't just standing up in one moment. It was choosing to stand up again and again, even when you were tired, even when you wanted to rest, even when the fight seemed endless. She pulled out her phone and texted Jennings. I'm in. The response came back immediately. Good. I'll notify TRADOC. You start in 3 weeks. 3 weeks wasn't enough time to prepare for what came next. Maya arrived at Fort Eustis, Virginia TRADOC headquarters on a cold Monday morning in November. She reported to a building that looked more like a corporate office than anything military, was issued a temporary badge, and escorted to a conference room where 12 other officers were already seated. She recognized exactly 2 of them. The first was Colonel Harrison, the man who'd tried to bury her during the review board at Camp Harrison. The man who'd questioned her credibility suggested she was the problem, done everything in his power to protect Rollins. He was on the task force. The second was Dr. Ellen Reyes, who'd been promoted to lieutenant colonel and brought in as the medical consultant. Reyes caught Maya's eye and gave a subtle nod. An ally. At least one. The task force director entered a major general named Patricia Lawson, early 60s, with the kind of face that suggested she'd seen everything and wasn't impressed by any of it. "Good morning," Lawson said without preamble. "You're here because the Secretary of the Army has decided that our training enterprise needs comprehensive reform. Some of you are here because you support that mission. Some of you are here because you were ordered to be here. I don't care which category you fall into. What I care about is results." She pulled up a presentation on the screen. Statistics, injury rates, attrition, suicide rates among trainees, reports of abuse spanning the last decade. "This is unacceptable," Lawson said flatly, "and we're going to fix it. Over the next 2 years, this task force will review every aspect of initial entry training, advanced individual training, and professional development courses. We will identify problems. We will develop solutions. And we will implement those solutions across the entire Army." She looked around the room. "I know some of you think this is unnecessary, that the old way worked just fine. If that's your position, I suggest you keep it to yourself, because I'm not interested in preserving a broken system. I'm interested in building a better one." After the briefing, the task force broke into smaller working groups. Maya was assigned to the instructor standards group along with Harrison and 3 other officers she didn't know. Harrison didn't acknowledge her. He took a seat at the opposite end of the table and opened his laptop like she didn't exist. Fine. Maya could work with that. The working group chair, a colonel named Stevens, distributed their first assignment. Review current drill sergeant and instructor certification requirements and identify gaps. "I want preliminary findings in 2 weeks, Stevens said. "Be thorough, be honest, and don't pull punches just because it makes people uncomfortable." They worked in tense silence for the first hour, each person focusing on their own research. But then Stevens asked for initial observations, and the room came alive with debate. "The certification process is too long," one major argued. "We're losing good NCOs because they don't want to spend 8 weeks away from their families." "The process is too short," another officer countered. 8 weeks isn't enough time to teach someone how to train soldiers safely and effectively." Harrison finally spoke. "The process is fine. The problem is, we're certifying people who don't have the right mindset, who are too soft, who think training should be comfortable." Maya's jaw tightened. She didn't respond. Not yet. "What do you mean by too soft?" Stevens asked. "I mean, instructors who prioritize feelings over readiness, who coddle trainees instead of preparing them for the reality of combat." Harrison glanced at Maya. "Who see every instance of tough training as abuse." There it was. The opening shot. Maya set down her pen. "Colonel Harrison, can you define tough training for me?" "You know what tough training is, Staff Sergeant?" "I'd like to hear your definition." Harrison's expression hardened. "Training that pushes soldiers beyond their comfort zone, that teaches them to operate under stress, that builds resilience through adversity." "And at what point does that cross the line into abuse?" "It doesn't, not if the instructor knows what they're doing." "So if an instructor kicks a soldier in the head during training, that's tough training." The room went silent. Harrison's face flushed. "That's not what I said." "But that's the logical conclusion of your argument. If there's no line between tough training and abuse, then anything an instructor does can be justified as building resilience." "There's a line," Harrison said tightly. "I just don't think it should be drawn by people who've never actually trained soldiers in a combat environment." Maya smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "I've trained over 300 combat medics. I've deployed twice. I've earned a Bronze Star with valor. How many combat deployments do you have, Colonel?" Harrison didn't answer. "That's what I thought." Maya turned to Stevens. "Sir, I think the problem isn't that we're certifying the wrong people. It's that we're not holding certified instructors accountable when they cross the line. We need clear standards, mandatory reporting, and consequences for violations. Without those, certification is meaningless. Stevens nodded slowly. That's worth exploring. Colonel Harrison, do you disagree? Harrison's jaw worked. I think we need to be careful about creating a culture where instructors are afraid to do their jobs. Instructors should be afraid to abuse soldiers, Maya said. That's not a bug, that's a feature. The rest of the meeting was productive, but the tension between Maya and Harrison hung in the air like smoke. When they finally broke for the day, Reyes caught up with Maya in the hallway. That was intense, Reyes said. He started it. I know, but you should be careful. Harrison has allies on this task force. If you make him look bad too many times, he's going to retaliate. Let him try. Maya was too tired to care. I didn't come here to make friends. I came here to change things. Just watch your back. Maya nodded, but she knew watching her back wasn't enough. She needed to be proactive. She needed to build her own coalition, gather her own allies, make sure that when Harrison inevitably tried to undermine her, she had the support to fight back. Over the next 2 weeks, she did exactly that. She had coffee with every member of the task force individually, learning their positions, their priorities, their concerns. She found common ground with the officers who wanted reform and documented the objections of those who didn't. She built relationships with the enlisted advisors who'd been brought in to provide ground-level perspective. And she worked, constantly. 16-hour days became normal. She reviewed certification standards, training manuals, incident reports from the last 5 years. She interviewed drill sergeants, instructors, trainees. She built a database of every documented abuse case she could find, cross-referencing it with instructor certifications and command climates. The picture that emerged was damning. Abuse wasn't random. It clustered in specific units under specific commanders with specific training philosophies. And the instructors who committed abuse often had warning signs in their records, complaints that were dismissed concerning behavior that was overlooked, a pattern of escalation that should have been stopped years earlier. Maya compiled everything into a report and presented it to the working group. This is the problem, she said, pulling up chart after chart. We're not just failing to hold abusers accountable. We're actively protecting them. We're dismissing complaints. We're transferring them instead of prosecuting them. We're letting them continue to train soldiers until someone finally gets hurt badly enough that we can't ignore it anymore. Stevens studied the data. This is comprehensive. How long did this take you? 2 weeks of 14-hour days. Jesus. Stevens looked at the rest of the group. Thoughts? One major leaned forward. If this is accurate, we need to completely overhaul how we handle misconduct allegations. It's accurate, Maya said. Every data point is sourced. Every case is documented. Harrison had been silent throughout the presentation. Now he spoke. This is cherry-picked data designed to support a predetermined conclusion. Maya turned to him. Show me what I cherry-picked. You're only looking at cases where abuse was alleged. You're not looking at the thousands of successful training cycles where instructors did their jobs correctly. Because successful training cycles aren't the problem. Abuse is the problem. But by only focusing on the negative, you're creating a skewed picture that makes it look like abuse is rampant when it's actually rare. Maya pulled up another slide. In the last 5 years, there have been 4,217 reported incidents of instructor misconduct. That's not rare. That's systemic. Harrison's face went red. How many of those were substantiated? 806. So, less than 20%. Which means either 80% of soldiers are lying about being abused, or 80% of abuse allegations are being dismissed without proper investigation. Maya let that hang in the air. Which do you think is more likely, Colonel? The room was silent. Stevens cleared his throat. We'll include this data in our preliminary report to General Lawson. Good work, Staff Sergeant Torres. After the meeting, Harrison cornered Maya in the parking lot. You think you're clever, he said. His voice was low, dangerous. You think you can come in here and destroy everything we've built. But you're wrong. Maya faced him. I'm not destroying anything, sir. I'm exposing what's already broken. You're on a crusade, and crusades end badly for the crusader. Is that a threat? It's a warning. Harrison stepped closer. You made me look bad at Camp Harrison. You're trying to make me look bad here. But I'm not Rollins. I have friends, and they're not going to sit back and let you dismantle a training system that's worked for decades. A training system that produces abusers isn't working. A training system that produces warriors does work. You just don't have the stomach for what that requires. Maya's hands clenched. I have the stomach for discipline, for high standards, for pushing soldiers to be their best. What I don't have the stomach for is calling abuse discipline and pretending it's the same thing. Harrison smiled coldly. We'll see how long you last here. He walked away. Maya stood in the parking lot, her heart pounding, her hands shaking with adrenaline she couldn't release. Reyes appeared beside her. You okay? No. Maya took a breath. But I will be. The confrontation with Harrison marked a turning point. The task force split into clear factions, those who wanted reform and those who wanted to maintain the status quo. Meetings became battlegrounds. Every recommendation was fought over. Every data point was challenged. But slowly, painfully, progress was made. The task force developed new instructor certification standards that included psychological screening, ethics, training, and scenario-based evaluations. They created mandatory reporting systems with third-party oversight. They established clear definitions of acceptable discipline versus abuse. They recommended criminal prosecution for instructors who crossed the line. General Lawson presented the preliminary recommendations to the TRADOC commander in March. 2 days later, Maya was called to Lawson's office. The commander approved Phase 1, Lawson said. She looked exhausted but pleased. New certification standards will be implemented Army-wide starting in July. Mandatory reporting goes live in September. We're also establishing an independent hotline for trainees to report abuse anonymously. Maya felt something loosen in her chest. That's incredible, ma'am. It's a start. Lawson leaned back. But there's pushback. A lot of it. Senior leaders who think we're going too far. Who think we're creating a generation of soft soldiers. Who are already looking for ways to water down these reforms once the spotlight moves elsewhere. So what do? We keep fighting. We document everything. We build support among commanders who get it. And we make it politically impossible to roll back these changes. Lawson looked at her. Which brings me to why I called you here. The Secretary of the Army wants to announce these reforms publicly, and he wants you standing beside him when he does it. Maya's stomach dropped. Ma'am, I know you hate the spotlight. I know you'd rather work behind the scenes. But this matters, Torres. Having you there, the soldier who started all of this, sends a message. It tells every trainee who's being abused that they can speak up. It tells every instructor who's crossing the line that they'll be held accountable. It tells the world that the Army is serious about change. Maya thought about Kemper, about Private Cross, about Davis, and the thousands of soldiers who were still training under instructors who thought abuse was acceptable. When? She asked. Next week. Pentagon. Full media coverage. Then I'll be there. The announcement happened on a Tuesday morning in April. Maya stood on a stage in the Pentagon briefing room wearing her dress uniform with all 14 ribbons displayed. The Secretary of the Army stood at the podium announcing comprehensive reforms to military training. General Lawson stood on one side. Maya stood on the other. Cameras flashed. Reporters asked questions. The secretary praised Maya by name-calling her a soldier who exemplifies the courage and integrity we demand of everyone who wears this uniform. Maya kept her expression neutral and professional, but inside she was screaming, not from fear, from relief, because this was real. The reforms were happening. The system was changing. After the press conference, Maya escaped to a quiet hallway and leaned against the wall. Her legs felt weak. Her hands were shaking. Morrison found her there. "You okay?" "I just changed Army policy while standing in front of the national media. I'm very much not okay." Morrison laughed. "You did great. You look terrified, but you did great. Thanks, I think. Come on. Vaughn wants to see you. General Vaughn was waiting in a small office down the hall. She'd been promoted to lieutenant general and now ran all of Army training. When Maya entered, Vaughn stood and smiled. You did it, Vaughn said simply. We did it, Maya corrected. No, you did it. I just cleared the path. Vaughn pulled out a small box. I have something for you. Inside was an Army Commendation Medal. Not just any ARCOM. The medal had a Combat V device attached, and the citation was already filled out. Maya read it. The citation described her actions at Camp Harrison, her testimony at the court-martial, her work on the Reform Task Force. It called her a model of moral courage and professional integrity whose actions have fundamentally improved the safety and welfare of thousands of soldiers. Ma'am, you earned it. Vaughn's voice was firm. Every word of that citation is true, and I wanted to make sure you had something tangible to remember that your sacrifice mattered. Maya's throat tightened. Thank you, ma'am. Vaughn pinned the medal on Maya's uniform herself. Then she stepped back and saluted. Maya returned the salute, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. The reforms rolled out over the next 6 months. New instructor certification standards, mandatory reporting systems, anonymous hotlines, independent oversight, and most importantly, prosecutions. Real prosecutions of instructors who'd been protected for years. Maya tracked every implementation documented, every success flagged, every attempt to water down the changes. She became known throughout TRADOC as the woman who wouldn't compromise, who wouldn't back down, who would show up at your headquarters unannounced if she heard you were trying to circumvent the new standards. Harrison tried to undermine her 3 more times. Each time, Maya outmaneuvered him with data documentation and a coalition of allies she'd spent months building. Eventually, Harrison requested a transfer. He was reassigned to a staff position where he could do minimal damage. Maya didn't celebrate. She just moved on to the next fight. By December, the task force released its final report, 300 pages of recommendations, covering everything from drill sergeant selection to trainee mental health support to command climate assessments. General Lawson presented it to Congress. The Secretary of Defense endorsed it, and the President mentioned it in a speech about military readiness and ethics. Maya watched the speech from her quarters at Fort Eustis. She'd been promoted to Sergeant First Class. She'd been offered a position as a permanent advisor to TRADOC. She'd been interviewed by national media, featured in military publications, invited to speak at West Point. She turned down most of it. Because the work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. There would always be another instructor who needed to be held accountable, another trainee who needed support, another system that needed to be challenged. But for the first time in 18 months, Maya felt like she could breathe. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Is this Staff Sergeant Torres? A young voicemail, nervous. Yes. Who is this? My name is Private Ryan Kemper. You saved my life at Camp Harrison. Maya's breath caught. Kemper? Yes, ma'am. I've been trying to get in touch with you for months. They said you were at TRADOC working on reforms, but I didn't know how to reach you, and then I saw you on the news today, and He stopped. I just wanted to say thank you. Maya sat down. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. Because I was dying and you helped me anyway, even though it cost you everything. And now I'm a combat medic. I'm about to deploy to Syria. And every day I try to be the kind of medic you were. The kind who won't let people die just to avoid making waves. Maya's vision blurred. Kemper, you're going to be a great medic. I hope so. I wanted you to know that what you did mattered. To me. To everyone who was on that field. We talk about you sometimes. About how you didn't quit even when they tried to break you. After they hung up, Maya sat in silence. She thought about that morning on the training field. About the kick, about the fear and the pain and the uncertainty, about the trial and the threats and the nights she couldn't sleep. And she thought about Kemper deploying as a combat medic, carrying with him the lesson that courage meant standing up even when it was hard. It was worth it, all of it. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of fear and doubt. Because systems didn't change on their own. They changed when people refused to accept them as they were. When people stood up and said, "This is wrong," and kept saying it until someone listened. Maya pulled out Vaughn's coin one last time. She looked at the word engraved on it. Courage. She'd learned what that word really meant. Not fearlessness. Not invincibility. Just the simple, stubborn refusal to stay silent when silence would be easier. She'd been kicked in the head on a Georgia training field. 3 generals had arrived. A unit had been shut down. Reforms had been implemented. Lives had been changed. But the real victory wasn't the reforms or the prosecutions or the medals. The real victory was Kemper deploying as a combat medic who'd learned that integrity mattered more than compliance. That was the legacy Maya was building, not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, but through the steady, unglamorous work of showing up every day and refusing to let the system break another soldier. She stood up. Tomorrow she'd be back at TRADOC reviewing implementation reports, fielding calls from commanders who wanted to water down the standards, fighting the same fights she'd been fighting for 18 months. And she'd keep fighting them, for as long as it took, because that's what courage was. Not one moment of defiance, but a lifetime of small choices to do what was right instead of what was easy. Maya Torres had made that choice on a training field in Georgia. She'd made it again in a courtroom. She'd made it again at TRADOC. And she'd keep making it every single day until the army she served finally became the army it claimed to be.